Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit with The Nature of Things, where we are realigning God, government, and natural law so that we might restore our American Republic. I'd like to give another shout out to the Shiloh Road publishers, The Founder's Bible. I get a lot of ideas about what to bring to you from this particular publication, and that would include the one this morning. Woodrow Wilson said, "The history of liberty is the history of resistance." He goes on to say, "The history of liberty is a history of limitation of government power, not the increase of it." And he also notes that when the concentration of power are resisted, we are resisting the powers of death. His word, not mine. He finishes with, "Concentration of power precedes the destruction of human liberties." So here's my question. Why would a Republican government like we have here in Florida continue to concentrate power in Tallahassee by taking away that power from local authorities? And what are we going to do about it? Will we and our county commissioners resist? With that, good morning, Mr. Levine.
Good morning, Chuck. Yeah, I'm going to tell you something, Chuck. I don't know why this is true, but it is true that my entire life I have been watching in the business community and in government the centralization of everything. We've talked about it, I'm sure, many times. Can you agree that you and I have talked about this on previous broadcasts?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. I'm sorry to bring it up
And
again.
I'm just telling you something, Chuck. Yeah, I'm just telling you that this is the root cause of all of our problems. And, it just goes to just pure blind, all of the worst things about humanity, greed, power, ambition, you know, is the root motivation for centralizing power, right? And I guess, we could get into it deeper, and it's a sad subject because pretty much everybody's for it. Everybody's for it. Like, for example, I mean, if you and I were running a business together and we learned that we could cut out a competitor and gain more market share through some, relationship oriented mechanism, which that's what, networking is, right? We're going to get together with the movers and shakers so we can grab more market share, control a particular issue. That's what networking is. That's, it goes to, what's the word, Chuck? When you, nepotism, it goes to nepotism because we want to control everything for the benefit of our group at the expense of someone else. And that's the root of the whole thing, Chuck. Can you agree with that or not?
Well, I do agree that there's a lot of nepotism going on, especially down here in Florida, and I do agree that that the Republican Party seems to want to control not just who runs for office, but how we as the constituents of the Republican Party get our news and understand what is really happening in Congress. For instance, we've been going over some of this legislation that has been passed this session, and we can't find a concise list of any of these laws anywhere determining what has passed, what has failed, and if you basically go to a list based on some group's preference of what they're concerned about. So it's really very difficult to understand what even just happened in our legislative session.
I couldn't agree more. And, so maybe it's me, maybe I'm just not aware that there's some place on the Florida Senate or the Florida House website that shows exactly, which legislation is fully enrolled. And that's the term that's used when something passes both chambers and is headed for the governor's desk. The bill is described as enrolled. And I can't find a list with artificial intelligence at my disposal. I can't find a exact list of which bills are headed for the governor's desk and which aren't. And I'm very troubled by that, Chuck.
Yeah, well, I I see your point, and at this point, the legislative session is over, and they're still not. They didn't pass a budget, and so that's going to have to what get kicked down the road a little bit. Um,
So basically, what's going on there, Chuck, is we already have basically two special sessions scheduled. We have one special session for the purpose of redistricting. We can have that conversation. And now we have another special session scheduled for the purpose of finalizing a budget, which is our constitutional, the legislature, the only bill that the legislature is required to pass constitutionally is the adoption of a budget. And that did not happen. There's still variances and discrepancies between what the Senate wants for a budget and what the House wants for a budget. And since it didn't get done within the regular session, they're going to have to come back. And I think the deadline for passing a budget is July 1. So there you go.
so there's also the issue of the property tax because that didn't make it either. And again, could there be a third session, or could the property tax issue be included in one of these other special sessions?
I just don't think that's going to happen, Chuck. As I predicted in the beginning, I told you and others on this show that I didn't think that property taxes were going to make it to the November ballot because that's a constitutional amendment. It would have to be voted on by referendum. And I predicted in the beginning that because the financial implications of a major change to property taxes and how it affects budgets, nobody has built out how the money will work. So therefore, in the beginning, I predicted that this would not pass the Florida legislature, which it didn't. And therefore, I don't foresee that happening in this election cycle, Chuck.
I think you said something about being it being a great bumper sticker slogan or something like that.
Yeah, exactly right. It's a bumper sticker, not a policy, right? Yes, it's a bumper sticker, not a policy. So
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
if you, ladies and gentlemen, on our side of the political argument, yeah, now instead of, being grateful for what our supermajority Republican legislature did for us, I guess we have the right to be angry because they basically gaslit us with the idea that we were going to get major tax reform on property taxes, and it looks like we're not. So this is the whole concept of overpromising and underdelivering, and that's exactly what we just went through. They overpromised and now have underdelivered, Chuck.
So so we've gone over several bills, and many of them really didn't go much of anywhere. But one of the bills that actually did pass was the SB, or I'm sorry, CSHB 991. And of course, it didn't necessarily pass exactly as we discussed it, and possibly we can take some time this morning and see what HB 991 actually did. Does that work for you, Mike?
Sure, but I just want to let the audience know that particularly on these really crucial bills, and I think all of our audience holds election integrity as a very important subject. And what happens here typically when the House and Senate get into the reconciliation of the version of these two chambers, which is required in order for the bill to go to the governor's desk, at the last minute, people come in with hardball amendments and force amendments to happen at the last minute, which really substantively changes the bill from its original uh, version, and even committee substitute bills. So eventually, there's a final committee substitute, which is passed, typically with a lot of heartburn, through the various chambers, because at the last minute, people are really playing hardball on these bills, trying to get them passed. And like I said, there are changes to the bills that surface at the last minute, and we certainly are experiencing that with this bill, Chuck.
So we have a list of bullet points that we're going to run through and see if you can't explain some of this
Quickly.
language, which is confusing to me even as I read it. We'll
Right.
start with this first point: revising the voter registration and list maintenance process to elicit additional citizenship information from voters, including documentation required by the Election Assistance Commission or federal law.
Right. Well, that basically, Chuck, just goes into it. Basically, when you get into the text of the bill, it just really defines that the Department of Motor Vehicles is required to share all of the information that they gather when people come in to get a new driver's license or to change their driver's license, that all of that information has to be fed up to the Secretary of State for the purpose of validating citizenship, which, and then to take it a little further, that like during the jury selection process as well, the courts, when they interview jurors to determine the eligibility of a juror, they also have to share information that they find, because obviously you have to be a citizen to be a juror. So if the court system determines that someone is ineligible to be a juror due to non-citizenship, then that information has to be shared with the Secretary of State. So when you get into that, as we said before in our previous broadcast, that the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles shouldn't be involved in voter registration. Well, obviously there are benefits to having that massive database with so many data points included in the database, that it is beneficial to the Secretary of State to have all that information available to them. Same with the courts, Chuck. But the fact is, we have to have honest people running those organizations who believe, as we do, that you should have to be a citizen to vote, right? So, that's kind of the whole thing. Bureaucracies can be great if they're properly utilized, but if they're used against the average citizen, trying to manipulate who gets elected to public office, then the same tool that can be a great tool turns out to be a bad tool, Chuck. So that's kind of where that bullet point goes. Long story short, the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles and the federal courts must share information with the Secretary of State, who now becomes the arbiter of election of voter roll management, Chuck, which is what you opened on. You said that collectivism is bad. Well, now you're taking voter roll verification and qualification away, basically, from the supervisor of elections, and you're centralizing that responsibility at the Secretary of State's office, Chuck.
Okay, the next bullet point: requiring that the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles include the legal status on any new replacement or renewal driver's license or identification card.
Yeah, we just covered it. Let's go to the next one.
Okay, requiring that the state provide voter registration lists to federal courts to aid in the jury selection. We talked about that one already as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
way ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
So they create a pre-certification vote validation process in place of current audit and recount processes. Can you?
Yeah, Chuck, and this is the two computer systems. You're going to have a computer system checking on another computer system. And this is one of the big heartburns that Defend Florida and other organizations have had, going into this. And I will just give a shout out to Defend Florida because their team did a really great job lobbying on this and bringing a lot of this stuff because there's a lot of favorable stuff in this bill, by the way. But you know that is one of those things. Let's see, that is not quite as favorable. So, for example, now it looks to me like, and I have to just check and make sure that's exactly how the text of the bill reads. Does that mean that we're going to have to go out and buy more voting machine tabulators, right? So that one can check the other. And then we get into Lake County here where we are, you know, the whole thing about, wow, if the supervisor of elections needed more space to store voting machines, he certainly needs more space now. Because if you have to, you know, have twice as many machines, you know, machines to verify machines, then that's a problem. And we don't like that version of the bill, Chuck.
Right. So this bill creates a pre-certification vote validation process in place of the current audit and recount process. Any English translation for
Right. So
that?
that basically it goes back um, to the canvassing board. And basically what it's saying is before the election can be validated and certified, then one machine has to check the results of the other machine. Now, then you're going to get into the language of the bill. You know, does it mean, do we actually scan paper ballots to determine the voter, you know, what the vote actually is on the verification process, or do we use ballot images? And that's a problem as well. So we need to dive into this in the final version to determine exactly how that verification is going to be done. Because I'm telling you that there's been no discussion of taking physical ballots and rescanning those ballots through an alternative machine system to validate. So I believe when we dig into the text of that bill, you're going to find out that basically you're taking the ballot images from one machine and then using those same ballot images in a different machine to validate to establish the validity of the first machine's count, which, I mean, what a mess that is. And I'm afraid that that's what this bill does, Chuck.
So our next point is that it creates a 5-year statute of limitations for the prosecution of a felony violation under the election code. So a 5-year statute of limitations, is that enough?
Probably not. I mean, as you look at the snail's pace by which investigations are done and charges are brought in a myriad of different scenarios. You know, you could get to the Epstein files, you can get to, you know, Hillary Clinton, you know, bleach bidding her hard drive, you can get all the issues out there, you know, the fraudulent voter activity that went on in 2020. So look at there. So if a 5-year window, well, that means that anything that happened in 2020, if it was subject to the same statute of limitations, would be no longer punishable. So I would say 5 years is too short. It should be a decade, 10 years. Right?
At least that's my opinion. You know, and some of this
Well,
stuff.
10 years is a good number.
Yeah.
So next year, we'll go back and we'll amend this bill on the statute of limitations from 5 years to 10 years. Hey, this is all we want. We just want to change here that the limitations is 10 years, not 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe we can get it done in 27.
Yeah, that should be easy
Right? Because
enough.
that's where we are, Chuck. I'll save that for my closing comment.
There you go. Good. Oh, you got a few minutes for that. So our next bullet point is it provides new fines and penalties for those violating the laws of involvement of foreign nationals in state elections. So we have new penalties for foreign nationals involved in our elections. That's good, right?
That's really good until you factor in the 5-year statute of limitations, right? Because these guys know that they have foreign money coming into their campaign accounts, and they just established the statute of limitations at 5 years, knowing that it'll take more than 5 years to flush it out and get the charges on the table, Chuck. So that whole RICO situation, that's exactly what you're talking about. as these politicians protect themselves from the crimes they know they're committing by limiting the statute of limitations to 5 years.
Yeah. So
And these are the people making the laws in our state. Right? So
yeah,
basically, how about this, ladies and gentlemen? Let's have a poll. How many of you believe that criminals should be in charge of making the laws in our state?
yeah. I think, Mike, you're you've really kind of got a situation there when you're calling our legislators criminals and then asking that question. It's tough. I mean, criminals, they're certainly unwilling to make it easy for us to understand what's going on. That's for sure.
Let me
Um,
tell you something, Chuck. I stand by that our legislators do things that they know are illegal and they do them anyway. And now they've restricted the statute of limitations to 5 years. So, I know that's a bold statement. And maybe I better start loading my gun to defend it, okay, and show, honestly and truly, if you just look at the resign to run law, right? I mean, Ron DeSantis literally legislatively changed the law so he could run for president without having to resign as governor. I mean, basically that means that you're basically managing the statutes of the state of Florida for your own personal political ambition. That to me is a good example of the length that our legislators and elected officials are willing to go to mold our legislative process to their own personal benefit, which is the antithesis of the purpose of government, Chuck.
so moving on to our next point, it provides the term racketeering activity under the Florida Racketeering Influence and Corruption Organization Act and includes certain election code violations. So that sounds like they're getting tough on something. It's a second from the bottom if you're looking there.
Yeah, I see it. I see it. Yeah. Again, that's something we're going to have to look into as well, Chuck. Unfortunately, I'm not 100% tuned up on what this does. You know what I mean? But certainly, yeah. I mean, look what they're saying. Just by having to amend the law, and hopefully they've done it, with this bill, hopefully they've done it. But I mean, is any of this stuff news to us, Chuck? Is anything new about this? So now we've known about the racketeering for a long time, and finally, under pressure from the President of the United States, our Secretary of State Cord Byrd just came out recently and said, "Hey, the passage of HB 991 is the equivalent of passing the Save America Act in the state of Florida." That is the victory lap that Cord Byrd is taking by passing this bill. He could have done this years ago. Cord Byrd has no more information today than he had when he took office, when he was appointed by the governor. So why did it take so long to get this done? But now, because the President of the United States and others are putting a lot of pressure on the United States Senate to pass the Save America Act, Cord Byrd is going to take a victory lap at this late date because he got this thing done. And I'm telling you that when we dig into the nuts and bolts of this 991, we're going to see that there's plenty of problems left to resolve, Chuck.
Yeah, so our final point, well, there are a few other things we want to talk about regarding this bill, but the final point on this particular list is the revising of the list of valid identification required at the polls. That's different than what we're talking about regarding citizenship, but first-time voters or vote by
Well,
mail
basically, it's
and
tied to citizenship, Chuck. That is tied to citizenship. Okay, the ID that you have to present at the polls makes a big difference as to citizenship, and that is the rationale for revising the types of ID that are acceptable at the polls. So, for example, in previous legislation, this is a good thing about the bill, that we have restricted it. You can no longer use some kind of an identification card from your homeowners association as evidence at the polling station, which is great. And there's other, really loosey-goosey. Your student ID, doesn't qualify as a sufficient identification at the polling station. So that's a good thing. They have actually limited this law down to a short list of identification that is acceptable at the polling station. That's a really good thing.
Yeah, yeah, they also have acceptable evidence of citizenship, which we can go into or not go into. But one of the other things we wanted to talk about was the inclusion of language as to who is qualified to run for office. And we have this change, if you change your name within a year of qualifying, you're not eligible to run for office. And we feel like maybe that was pretty directly attributed to one particular um, candidate.
Well, it's interesting because like Matt Taylor is running for the Secretary of Agriculture job, and he formally, this guy Matt Taylor is a grassroots guy, and he's a smart guy. So he found a way to give himself a competitive advantage on the ballot. Okay. So what he did is he changed his name from Matt Taylor. He legally changed his name from Matt Taylor to Matt the Welder. And then he filed his campaign documents using the name Matt the Welder. And part of that process, the supervisor of elections, division of elections says, how would you like for your name to appear on the ballot? And he says, Matt the Welder. So, for example, if somebody who has done absolutely zero research before they walk into the voting booth and they see they have two choices, they can either elect Wilton Simpson, who has not filed in this race, by the way. Wilton Simpson has not filed to get reelected to his position as a Secretary of Agriculture, but the Republican Party of Florida has already endorsed him, even though he hasn't filed. And now you have Matt Taylor, who has changed his name to Matt the Welder, who is a grassroots candidate, which otherwise would have a very low probability of winning. So he's smart and he says, hey, I'm going to get myself a competitive advantage by changing my name to something that an uninformed voter would vote for if that's all the information they had when they walk into the voting booth. They have, two names, Wilton Simpson or Matt the Welder, and some guy says, yeah, what the hell, I'd like to see old Matt the Welder be the Secretary of Agriculture. Other than that, rich politician Wilton Simpson, who was the president of the Senate, which of course they don't know that, right? But they go in and say, yeah, who would I rather have? This guy Wilton Simpson or Matt the Welder? Well, heck, I'm going to vote for Matt the Welder, right? And Matt was pretty smart, and he did that. And now the state of Florida has made a legal change of name within 365 days of the qualifying period, a reason for disqualification. Okay. Now, when we get into the nuts and bolts of this bill, Chuck, we're going to have to see when is this bill valid? And then basically the effective date of this bill is January 1, 2027. But certain provisions, like the racketeering provision you pointed out earlier, the effective date of that provision is immediately upon signing into law. So I need to go back into this bill and see if the change on the name change is January 1 of 2027, or is there a specific provision in the bill that says the effective date of that law is immediately, and I'll just have to let you know what I find out. But Matt the Welder knows. I promise you, Matt Taylor knows. So if you want to know, ladies and gentlemen, just find Matt the Welder on your social media, because Matt's talking about it a lot. Okay.
I'm
So if you
sure.
want to know immediately, just go do that.
Well, we
Or
are,
call
believe it or not, out of time. So I'm looking to you for your final
them.
comments.
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. They call it politics for a reason. And, you know, I don't know. I guess we're making progress. Would we be better off had House Bill 991 not passed? I think I'll take the wins, um, and knowing that we still have a lot of work to do on our election process here in the state of Florida. And my other point would be that while the legislative session for 2026 is over, the beginning of our work for 2027 has just begun. So I'm working beginning now to prepare for 2027. And there's a lot of stuff that we need to do and a lot of stuff we need to talk about between now and then. Chuck Benoit.
Well, I thank you, Mike Levine, and thank you all for tuning into our twice weekly live stream. Please check us out on Facebook at Restoring Our American Republic, or check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic -ROAR. Please like and share the program, and remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. Until next time, God bless you, God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.